Oh, well, hello there. Welcome back to our discussion on religion. We're going to jump into religion and magic. And I think this is a really interesting sort of point to take. Um, a lot of this depends on perspective, right? Religion and magic, and when we talk about sort of magic, we're not talking about like magic tricks by a magician. When we talk about magic, it's more about, again, understanding and relating to the world around you and being able to um, guide those aspects. And we might say you believe in the Christian, one of the Christian religions, and you might look at someone that's practicing magic as a shaman within another culture, an indigenous culture, and you call it magic, right? Because what they're doing, they might be creating some sort of um, potion or you know uh, something that engages them and their environment, and you would see that as magic. They would turn around and look at you and say, well, you're doing the same thing. You are praying to a priest, and that priest is using their mental powers to convey a prayer to your God. And you are eating the body and blood of Christ to imbue it, right? But that's creating something that's symbolizing something, and that right there would be considered magic, right? So a lot of this sort of comes back to the idea of perspective. Whose perspective are you taking on? Um, this is where we have to kind of look at when we look at um, religion and magic. We're looking oftentimes at what has the more cultural capital, right? What has more influence? What is considered to be taboo, right? If we think about witchcraft, right? Witchcraft is one of those things where it's like, oh, there's these practices that are done that seem arcane, and for them, it's the same way when they look at some other culture. That's not religion, that's magic. That's not communing with nature or their gods. That is something taboo, something fake or false. So those terms need to be looked at and used from perspective. Um, Now, when we talk about different aspects of math, we see that there are a couple that we're going to talk about. Sort of imitative magic, which can be done through some sort of a performance, a dance, an incantation, the manipulation of a doll, with like voodoo. But, performance, if we think about dance or incantations, that would be Sunday Mass, right? An incantation is a prayer, right? And if everybody says the Lord's Prayer, right, that in itself is an incantation, right? So when we think about this, that's think about it in multiple ways. So you have that imitative magic, that connection between um, the using your language, using your ideas um, to perform this kind of magic. And then we have contagious magic, and that is oftentimes how we connect to other things. So if we take the Holy Sacrament, right, taking that usually like that cracker and that drink of wine as the body of Christ, well, that's creating a physical connection, right? That could be the laying of hands on someone that is sick or ill, something that has to have some sort of bodily contact, holding hands during prayer, right? If you're sitting at your dinner table and everyone holds hands and then a prayer is given, that is contagious magic, right? Everyone is sharing in that moment. They're putting their wills together to, right, uh, invoke this spiritual activity. And so when we look at those kinds of things, we can look at our own culture, right, and see how that works. And then we can compare it to other cultures and what are they doing to do similar things so that we have a better understanding as to why those things are happening. Uh, we look at like witchcraft as seen as mystical, as a means of explaining the world in an attempt to find ourselves a meaningful way of communicating with the unknown. And, you know, a lot of times, again, it all comes down to perspective, right? We look at witchcraft, oftentimes connecting to the dead, connecting to the spirits and all that stuff. But a lot of that stuff is connected just in a very similar way to um, Christianity, connecting to spirits, connecting to our dead loved ones and that might live in heaven or wherever, right? It's just done different ways, and it's done with a different ethical ideology, right? Again, creating that distinction between religion and magic really is all about perspective, right? What religion are you practicing, and who are you comparing it against? Um, we have to look at a lot of this and understand that while it might seem irrational, it might seem weird or strange, um, these practices usually have deep meaning within that society. And going back to um, Harris, when we're talking about sort of the practical reasons why people do a certain thing, right? And how it connects us to each other. I was just thinking about witchcraft, right? And oftentimes the connection between cats and women. Um, when we go back a few centuries, and the persecution of witches. One of the ways that um, witches were being persecuted as folks were living through the plague that was going through Europe, right? The Black Plague. We know that the Black Plague was being transmitted by rats, right? And wasn't the rats themselves, but it was the fleas on those rats that were carrying this disease. And all of a sudden, we were finding that a lot of the survivors, the people that weren't being hurt, were women, oftentimes widowers, um, or old maids. And they were oftentimes cat ladies, right? They had cats with them to keep them company, and those cats were keeping the mice and the rats and the rodents at bay. They were killing them and not allowing that same sort of exposure to take place. And because of this, because of the relationship between those cats and mice, had that adverse effect between causality and what was actually happening within that culture, because they were seeing people dying, but these old maids with these cats were surviving in greater numbers. Why? Why were they? Um, and they were oftentimes persecuted for it and thought that they were doing something deviant. And a lot of times, if you think about at that age, if you weren't married, right, um, that can actually be social taboo, right? It was common that you needed to be married, you needed to have kids, your job was to procreate and have more kids, create more Christians. And if you were married, if you were widowed, or if you were unmarried, um, you might not embody that same sort of lifestyle. You might have a different knowledge base. You might have what we might consider to be like those shamanistic abilities, where you might have healing powers, whether it's a good knowledge of herbs, right, and plant life. These things all of a sudden become reason for uh, persecuting, right? If you're going through the Black Plague, people are dying, people are in pain, people are scared. And when people are scared, they want explanations for why things are happening. And if they can create one that, sort of soothes their fear and their anger, they might engage in it easier. So understanding the circumstances at the time would help us understand why certain people were persecuted at those times, and sort of understand the reality of it. So, right, we can look at that, and then we can see sort of the fallout, the historical fallout, and why we have at Halloween we focus on witches and cats and spirits and stuff, because there's this historical context that comes down through our religious practices. But then, we start to also understand the history, right? We start looking at the reasons why, not just the stories that have been told, um, as we gain a better understanding. Okay. Religion, meaning, and power. Now, religion has, again, a lot of influence in cultures. And we have to understand that it has a lot of power as well. And that power is that influence. Whether it is the foundation of sort of the morals and ethics of a community, which oftentimes it is, to the people that are wielding that power, right? When we look at religious leaders, that power is given typically freely to those individuals, and it gets reinforced, right? Oftentimes it's that priest that will give you permission to go to the afterlife, right? A lot of times when people are dying, they want to have a priest come over and offer those final rites, right? That'll get you into heaven. That kind of opens that door, and you can have that emotional connection to it. That if you get it, right? If you're laying there on your deathbed, you're going to die no matter what. But that priest comes in, gives you those final rites, and now you can relax. You know that the next step after death is heaven, right? That's power, right? Because if you had that belief, and that priest came up to you and said, hey, you did this wrong, I'm not going to allow you access to heaven. In fact, you're going to hell. You are going to hell. What kind of emotional impact is that going to have on someone, that you're being told by another person of authority that you do not qualify to go to heaven? Instead, you're going to like the terrible place. And you believe it, right? Because that is how your world has worked. So what do? Right? How do you engage within that community? How much of an impact is it going to have on you, on your next step, the next thing that you do? Are you going to try and win that right back? Are you going to engage with that ideology of you being a bad person, so you go out and become a pirate or something like that? Right? So how do you engage in it? So those individuals, those priests, right, the gatekeepers, and they're the gatekeepers of knowledge. They are the gatekeepers to the afterlife. They're the gatekeepers to the community wealth, right? All of that stuff is connected to these individuals, and they can enforce these ideas. And it goes beyond just physical force, but that spiritual force, that capability of influencing your emotional response. And we are very emotional creatures. Religion gives us, when we're looking at it, that meaning in life, right? What kind of meaning should I have? Like, should I be a good person? How do I become that good person? What are the things that I need to accomplish to see myself as a successful individual within this community. A lot of times those are given by that religious ideology, right? What does it mean to be a good husband? What does it mean to be a good wife? What does it mean to be a good child, right? A productive member of society, right? Those norms and values are given to you oftentimes by that religious community. Even outside of the religious community, say you are an agnostic or an atheist, um, those values trickle down, right? And you can certainly live a very ethical and normal life as anyone else would without having that religious influence. But it's not because you came up with it yourself, right? We know that there are basic ideas. Don't kill your neighbor, right? But a lot of that is connected to those religious ideologies. We just agree with them. You know, it's like, oh, I shouldn't kill this person because I'm a moral person, but I might be an atheist. Well, yeah, but a lot of those rules are coming from those religious ideologies. That influence is still there. So you can't necessarily escape from it, which means that it has power over you still, even if you are non practicing. It can still have that impact on you. It creates symbols. Those symbols, again, create reminders towards a belief, a practice, a code of conduct. Um, we've talked a little bit about symbols before. They are extremely powerful. You walk into a room and everyone is showing those same symbols. Guess what? You're going to have influence there. And they're going to have influence over you because you all practice the same things. It helps us to understand and create those mental maps, right? The organization of the world, the language that we need to understand that world and creating that greater understanding. Again, those mental maps are oftentimes connected to language and how we create that understanding. If we create enough language, enough dialogue that focuses on that religious experience, and that's what you learn throughout your entire life, well, that's your worldview. That's a lot of power. How we organize the world, how we view it, how we use that language um, can allow us to understand, right, how the world works. And if we are studying another culture, right, we understand how people organize things, how much effort they put into that language, into that practice of that particular religion. We can understand the importance of it within that community. What gives symbols power? By giving something meaning, right, in a sense, we also give it power. Again, talking about that example I gave earlier, you take that Christian crucifix, that cross, you are putting in it a lot of feeling, a lot of emotion. You are connected to it. You wear it. Maybe you get a tattoo of it. You put it up in your house. You hang stuff in your car. You see it on a regular basis. And every time you see it and you see someone else with it, it gives you that connection. Maybe because you see someone else with it, you already see that connection, which allows you to maybe open up with them easier, right? You automatically see that you have something in common, which gives you something in common to talk about. Creates those bridges between communities. If you know that this community is also Christian, well, you know that you're not that far away from them. Even if there is a language barrier, even if there is a cultural barrier, right? That religion creates that bridge. That symbology allows that bridge to be created. We look to those, again, experts, shamans, priests, and they become those powerful figures. And in essence, symbols themselves, right? Anytime that we think of those individuals, they have that capability of allowing you access, access to the deity, access to that supernatural power that will give you the things that you want and desire. And if you think about prayer itself, um, you can look at it as that connection to that supernatural force, or it is just something that you put out there into the world, right? It all depends on how you might see that prayer, but that prayer can also be very symbolic and very powerful, depending on how you view it, right? We oftentimes hear the power of prayer when it comes to not only even like political or spiritual events or in catastrophes when something bad happens, is my thoughts and prayers are going to go out to these people. And you believe it, that you will pray for these people and you will have a positive impact through that prayer. Is this the case? Is your prayer going to have an impact? That's not for me to say. For me, I want to understand what happens when you do that. What is the impact that that prayer is going to have on that community? Is it the only thing that is done? Is it enough to be done? How do we look at it? How do we react when something like that happens to our community versus someone else's community? All of this stuff, right? Okay, we're going to pause there and we'll get back to our discussion in a minute.